The black waitress had spent years working double shifts at a small diner, making just enough to cover her expenses, but she never let exhaustion weaken her kindness. So when she saw an old man in a wheelchair trembling under the awning to shield himself from the rain, she didn't hesitate. She brought him inside, handed him a bowl of soup, and talked with him. Across the street, a billionaire was watching their every move. That billionaire was his son, and her simple act of kindness was about to open doors she never thought possible. The neon glow of Maple Street Diner flickered against the rain-slick pavement, casting a warm halo over the nearly empty street. Inside, the scent of fried bacon and stale coffee hung in the air, mixing with the low hum of the radio playing some forgotten blues track. It was nearing closing time, and Riley Carter was bone-tired, her feet aching from another 12-hour shift. She wiped her hands on her apron, absently brushing a stray curl from her damp forehead. Outside, the storm had picked up. Rain pounded against the diner windows, streaking them in uneven trails, distorting the city lights beyond. As Riley reached for the rag to wipe down the counter one last time, a figure caught her eye. A man in a wheelchair, struggling against the wind as he maneuvered toward the diner's awning. He was old, at least 75, with thinning silver hair and a sharp, dignified face. Despite the rain-soaked overcoat draped over his frail frame, there was an air of quiet authority about him. His hands, long and elegant, gripped the wheels with effort as he tried to push himself closer to shelter. But the pavement was slick, the incline slight, but enough to stall his progress. Riley didn't hesitate. She never did. She shoved open the diner door, the bell jingling harshly above her, and stepped into the downpour. "Hey, let me help," she called, already gripping the handles of his chair before he could protest. The old man stiffened. "I can manage," he said, voice crisp but worn with age. "Yeah? Well, I don't like watching people struggle, so humor me." Riley tightened her grip and pushed him forward, her sneakers splashing against the wet sidewalk. She felt the slight tremble in his shoulders, whether from the cold or exhaustion she couldn't tell. Once inside, the warmth of the diner wrapped around them. Riley shook the rain from her arms before guiding him toward a booth near the radiator. "Sit tight, I'll grab you something warm," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I didn't ask for—" "Good thing I'm not the type to wait for an invitation," she interrupted, flashing a quick grin before disappearing behind the counter. The old man exhaled, rubbing his temple as he glanced around the modest diner. It wasn't fancy. Hell, half the booths had torn upholstery, and the coffee maker had been on its last legs for years, but there was a simple comfort to the place. Riley returned minutes later, placing a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup and a plate of buttered toast in front of him. "Best thing for a rainy night," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. For a moment he just stared at the food as if debating whether to accept it. Then, with a small nod of thanks, he picked up the spoon. They sat in silence as he ate. Riley watched, pretending not to notice the way his fingers trembled slightly as he dipped the spoon into the broth. His coat was expensive but worn, his shoes polished but wet from the storm. He didn't look homeless, just tired. "Got a name?" she asked after a while. The old man wiped his mouth carefully before answering. "Charles. Charles Whitmore." Riley nodded. "Riley. So, Charles, what were you doing out there in this mess?" He set the spoon down, eyes sharp but unreadable. Waiting. "For what?" A pause. Then, "My son." Something in the way he said it made Riley sit up a little straighter. She knew that tone, a mixture of expectation and resignation. She'd heard it in her own mother's voice back when Riley was just a kid waiting on a father who never showed. She glanced toward the door, where the rain still poured in heavy sheets against the glass. "And he left you out here alone?" The question was blunt, edged with something close to judgment. Charles exhaled, shaking his head. "He's coming, just got held up." Riley didn't hide her skepticism. "Uh-huh, must be real important, whatever kept him." Charles studied her, something knowing flickering behind his eyes. "You always this quick to assume the worst about people?" Riley huffed a quiet laugh. "Experience makes it easy." Charles didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the toast, took a small, deliberate bite. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, then said, "Not everyone deserves the weight of your past." The words hit deeper than she expected. Riley forced a smirk. Well, damn. Didn't know I was signing up for a therapy session when I brought you inside. Charles chuckled, actually chuckled, low and amused. It's been a long time since someone spoke to me like this, he admitted. Like what? Like I'm just a man eating soup instead of a name on a building. That made her pause. Riley frowned. A name on a building? Before Charles could answer, the diner door swung open, the bell jangled loudly, the wind whipping in a burst of cold air as a man stepped inside. Tall, impeccably dressed. Sharp jawline, slicked back dark hair, and an aura of controlled precision. His eyes a piercing shade of steel blue locked onto Charles instantly, his posture shifting with something between concern and irritation. Jesus, Dad, he muttered, striding forward. I told you to wait inside the lobby, not out in the damn rain. So this was the son. Riley leaned back, arms crossed, watching as the man approached. There was something about him that instantly rubbed her the wrong way. Maybe it was the way he barely spared her a glance, or the fact that he looked more annoyed than worried about the old man he'd left outside in a storm. Charles, however, remained unfazed. Plans changed, he said simply, dabbing his mouth with a napkin before gesturing toward Riley. This young woman was kind enough to help. For the first time, Nathaniel Whitmore turned to really look at her. His gaze was cool, assessing. Riley felt the weight of it immediately. The kind of look she'd gotten from men in suits before, the kind that saw where she worked, what she wore, and dismissed her in an instant. His nod was polite, distant. I appreciate it. Riley cocked an eyebrow. Yeah, well, he was soaking wet and sitting outside alone. Didn't feel right just ignoring him. Nathaniel's jaw ticked slightly, like something about that statement didn't sit well with him, but instead of responding, he turned back to Charles. Are you ready to go? Charles sighed but nodded. Yes. He turned back to Riley. Thank you, dear, truly. Riley waved him off. Just a bowl of soup, Mr. Whitmore, nothing special. But Charles smiled, like he knew something she didn't. Nathaniel placed a firm hand on his father's wheelchair handles, already moving toward the door. Before stepping outside, he glanced back at Riley once more, his expression unreadable. Then they were gone, swallowed by the night and the rain. Riley exhaled, shaking her head as she grabbed the empty dishes. Rich folks, she muttered under her breath, but as she wiped down the counter, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had just shifted, like a door had opened, one she never expected to walk through. The rain had slowed to a dull drizzle by the time the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the curb, its taillights vanishing into the slick, glistening streets. Riley stood at the counter, arms crossed, watching through the diner's fogged-up window until they disappeared completely. She exhaled, shaking her head before turning back to the dishes. Rich folks. They moved through the world like it was built just for them, barely sparing a glance for the people holding it together at the seam. Still, Charles had been different. There was something in his eyes, something that felt real, and that bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The next night, just as Riley was flipping the chairs onto the tables and preparing to lock up, the diner's bell jangled sharply. She turned, expecting a straggler looking for a last-minute cup of coffee. Instead, standing just inside the doorway, dry this time, crisp in a tailored charcoal coat, was Nathaniel Whitmore. Riley's brows shot up. Lose your dad again? Nathaniel barely reacted, his face impassive. He stepped forward, the measured weight of his presence filling the small space. He's fine, he said, voice smooth but unreadable. I came here for you. Riley narrowed her eyes. Well, that's new. Nathaniel exhaled, a flicker of impatience in his gaze, but he kept his composure. I'm not here to waste your time, Miss Carter. I'm here to offer you a job. Riley barked out a short laugh. A job? She gestured around them. What, you need someone to bring coffee to your board meetings? Nathaniel didn't smile. I need someone with a different perspective. It made her pause, not because she believed him, but because of the way he said it, like he was testing the words out himself. She folded her arms. You see, that sounds like rich people code for something. So how about you just say whatever it is you really mean? Nathaniel studied her, his expression cool but not uncurious. I run a company built on innovation, on ideas that push past the expected. He took a slow step forward, like he was making sure she was really listening. But the problem with running a company like that is you end up surrounded by people who all think the same way. People who have the same backgrounds, the same education, the same blind spots. He paused. You don't have those blind spots. Riley stared at him. So, let me get this straight. You want to hire me because I'm not like the people you usually hire. Nathaniel nodded. Essentially. She let out a low whistle. Wow, you really suck at making something sound like a compliment. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched, barely there but noticeable. That's not what I meant. Oh, I know exactly what you meant, Riley shot back. You need a reality check, so you figured, hey, let's pluck some poor black waitress from the city and throw her into the mix. Maybe she'll teach us how to see the real world. She shook her head. No thanks. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. That's not what this is. Sure as hell sounds like it. There was a moment of silence, thick and charged. Riley could feel the weight of his stare, the way he was recalibrating, reassessing. And for the first time, something shifted in his gaze, not frustration, not impatience, but something closer to recognition. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a card, setting it on the counter. I won't waste more of your time, he said, voice even. But if you change your mind, call me. Riley didn't pick up the card. Didn't even glance at it. Nathaniel didn't seem surprised. He simply gave a curt nod, then turned and strode toward the door. Just as he reached it, Riley called after him, Why me? He stopped, but didn't turn around. She took a step forward, eyes narrowed. You could have hired anyone. Hell, you probably already have people whispering in your ear, telling you what's wrong with your company, so why come back here? Nathaniel hesitated. Then finally he said, Because my father thinks you're worth listening to. And just like that, he was gone. Riley let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Slowly, she reached for the business card, flipping it between her fingers. Nathaniel Whitmore, CEO. The embossed letters gleamed under the dull diner lights, expensive, pristine. She should have tossed it in the trash, should have let it sit there on the counter until some half-drunk customer spilled coffee on it, but instead she slipped it into her pocket. For 2 days, Riley ignored the card. It sat on her nightstand, untouched, its sharp, embossed letters gleaming under the dim glow of her bedside lamp. Every time she looked at it, she heard Nathaniel Whitmore's voice, calm and calculated. Because my father thinks you're worth listening to. That was the part that stuck with her. Not the 6-figure salary she was sure came attached to the offer, not the idea of working for a billion-dollar company, but the fact that Charles Whitmore, a man who had no reason to give a damn about a waitress from the South Side, had thought she was worth something. That didn't happen. Not to people like her. By the 3rd day, the curiosity burned more than the skepticism. And maybe, just maybe, a small part of her wanted to prove something. So, against her better judgment, she dialed the number. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. Mr. Whitmore's office. Riley hesitated. Then, forcing herself to sound unaffected, she said, Tell him the poor black waitress from the city is calling. There was a pause, then, 1 moment, please. Less than 10 minutes later, she was stepping into an elevator that smelled like wealth. The sleek, steel-paneled walls of Whitmore Innovations rose around her as she ascended, each floor ticking by in silence. Riley had never set foot in a building like this before, where the floors shone like glass and the air carried a weight she couldn't quite name. When the elevator doors slid open, a woman in a charcoal-gray suit was already waiting for her, blonde, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who looked like she judged people before they even spoke. Miss Carter? The woman didn't wait for confirmation. Follow me. Riley walked, feeling the weight of every stare as they moved through the pristine, high-ceilinged office space. She could feel the glances from employees in their designer suits, the way their eyes flicked from her thrift store jacket to the sneakers that had seen better days. She knew exactly what they were thinking. What is she doing here? By the time she was led into Nathaniel's office, she was already debating whether to turn around and walk out. But then she saw Charles Whitmore. The old man sat by the window, a cup of tea in his hand, watching the city below like it held an answer he'd been waiting on. When he saw her, he smiled. "Miss Carter," he greeted, like they were old friends. "Glad you came." Nathaniel was at his desk, sleeves rolled up, gaze unreadable as he studied her. He didn't rise, didn't offer a greeting, just watched. Riley crossed her arms. "All right, you got me here. So what exactly are you trying to sell me?" Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She didn't move. He exhaled, rubbing his temple, then leaned forward. "I'm not here to sell you anything. You asked why I came back to the diner. The truth is, I don't usually take advice from my father." Charles let out a quiet chuckle. "That's an understatement." Nathaniel ignored him, "But when he told me you were different, I listened, and I think he's right. You see things others don't." Hannah shrugged her shoulders and seemed unable to eat. Riley's brow furrowed. "And that's worth a six-figure paycheck?" Nathaniel tilted his head. "You tell me." He pushed a file across the desk. "Take a look." Riley hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were reports. Financial breakdowns, employee reviews, project assessments, a messy, complicated picture of a company that, despite its success, had cracks forming beneath the surface. Nathaniel tapped a particular page. "Tell me what's wrong with this." Riley scanned the document. It was a community outreach proposal, a sleek, polished plan that looked good on paper but felt off. "You really want to know?" she asked. Nathaniel just nodded. Riley exhaled. "All right, first problem, this is bullshit." A single stunned second of silence. Charles let out a laugh, low and rich. Nathaniel, to his credit, didn't react, just raised an eyebrow, waiting. Riley flipped through the pages. "This whole thing is performative. You're throwing money at diversity initiatives to make yourselves look good, but nothing in here actually changes anything for the people who need it. You're funding programs, but you're not hiring from the communities you claim to care about. You're putting your name on schools, but not investing in the students past a headline." She set the file down, meeting his gaze. "If you really wanted to fix something, you wouldn't be asking me what's wrong. You'd already know." Nathaniel didn't speak, didn't blink, just studied her, like she was a problem he couldn't quite solve. Then finally he leaned back in his chair. "You're hired?" Riley blinked. "Excuse me?" Nathaniel crossed his arms. "You want to prove me wrong? Fine, do it from the inside." She let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "That's not why I came here." Charles set down his tea. "Then why did you?" Rise opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she wanted to prove something? Because part of her wanted to be seen, truly seen for once? Or because, deep down, she knew she wasn't meant to stay behind that diner counter forever? Nathaniel watched her struggle with the answer, then gave a slow nod. "Call me when you decide." Riley didn't reply. But this time when she left the office, she didn't throw away the file. Riley's first day at Whitmore Innovations felt like walking into a battlefield unarmed. The stares started the moment she stepped off the elevator, polite but cutting, thinly veiled curiosity wrapped in condescension, the kind of looks that said, "What is she doing here?" without needing to say a damn thing. Nathaniel hadn't placed her in some high-powered position, hadn't given her a fancy title or an office with a skyline view. Instead, he'd dropped her into the trenches, made her an assistant in the corporate development division, a place where decisions were made but power was carefully hoarded. It was a test. He wanted to see if she could swim before he let her anywhere near the deep end. The work itself wasn't hard. Scheduling meetings, reviewing reports, sitting in on conference calls where no one bothered to acknowledge her. But it was the people that made it exhausting. She heard the whispers, the hushed conversations in hallways when they thought she wasn't listening. Nathaniel's charity case, some experiment, diversity hire, temporary. Riley didn't react. She never did. She just watched, listened, waited. And she learned. She learned who held the real power in the company, not just on paper, but in the way people leaned in when they spoke, the way others paused before responding, measuring their words carefully. She learned that Langley, the senior executive overseeing company acquisitions, was the one everyone pretended to respect but no one actually trusted. She'd learned that the outreach initiatives Nathaniel had her critique were still being pushed forward, half-baked and hollow, because someone upstairs didn't give a damn about changing the way things worked. She also learned that Charles Whitmore had never liked Langley. It had been a passing comment, something Charles had muttered that night in the diner over a bowl of soup. Some men know how to build something, others just know how to steal. Riley hadn't thought much of it then, but now, a month into this job, the words rang in her head like a warning bell. Because 2 days ago, Whitmore Innovations suffered a major data breach. Confidential project details, financial records, development blueprints, leaked to a competitor. Nathaniel had torn through the office like a storm, demanding answers, calling for investigations. And while no one had been officially blamed, whispers had started pointing to one name: Langley. And Riley had a feeling those whispers were right. So she started paying attention, more than before, watching him. The way his fingers drummed against his desk in meetings, restless and twitchy. The way he smiled too easily when questioned, his answers rehearsed but never quite convincing. Then the messages started. At first it was subtle, a wrong number call that hung up when she answered, then an email, unsigned, that just said, "Stop digging." And then, one night, a text. "Leave it alone, Miss Carter. You don't belong here." Her stomach twisted. She brought it straight to Nathaniel. He read the message twice, jaw tight, then set the phone down. This could be nothing. Riley folded her arms. Or it could be everything. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose, rubbing the bridge of it like he could already feel the migraine forming. "You realize who you're accusing, right?" "I'm not accusing anyone," Riley shot back. "Yet, but someone sure as hell wants me to stop looking." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tapping against the desk. Then, finally, he met her gaze. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Carter." Riley leaned forward. "If I'm wrong, then this should all go away. But if I'm right, he's going to keep pushing, and eventually he's going to push the wrong person." Nathaniel studied her, really studied her, and for the first time Riley saw something flicker behind that carefully controlled expression. Not just consideration. Trust. Then, with a slow nod, he said, "Let's find out if you're right." The trap was set. Nathaniel had quietly circulated a memo about a supposed merger, one that, if leaked, would be catastrophic for the company. The document was fake, a carefully crafted lie, but the bait was perfect. Riley had watched from her desk as whispers spread like wildfire through the upper floors. It was only a matter of time before the wrong person took the wrong step. It took 2 days. On the third night, security flagged an unauthorized data transfer. Someone had accessed the confidential file and attempted to send it to an external source. Nathaniel received the alert first. Riley wasn't in the room when he saw it, but she could imagine it. The slow inhale, the tightening grip around his pen, the sharp realization that he had his man. "Langley." Nathaniel's voice was steel when he called her into his office. "We got him." Riley didn't celebrate, not yet, not until she saw it for herself. Langley was called into a boardroom meeting the next morning. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, his expression controlled but sharp, Riley at his side. Security stood discreetly by the door, silent but ready. Langley walked in, smooth as ever, his confidence unshaken, until Nathaniel slid a folder across the table. "This is the email you sent last night." Langley glanced at the file, then let out a short laugh. "You're mistaken." Nathaniel didn't blink. "No, Langley, you are." The room was dead silent. Riley watched the moment it happened. The flicker of doubt, the slight twitch in Langley's jaw, the way his fingers tapped twice against the table before stilling. A tell. A crack in his carefully built armor. Then he did what men like him always did. He tried to talk his way out of it. Nathaniel, let's be rational here. These are serious accusations. I've given years to this company. You think I'd risk everything for... Nathaniel cut him off. Security. The guard stepped forward. Langley's entire demeanor shifted. The charm disappeared, the mask cracking into something sharp and angry. He turned to Riley. This is you, isn't it? His voice was low, venomous. You don't belong here, and we all know it. You think you've won something? You're nothing more than a... Nathaniel stood. Finish that sentence, Langley. The room turned ice cold. Langley's jaw clenched, but he didn't say it. Didn't dare. Instead, he scoffed, straightened his tie, and allowed himself to be escorted out. Riley exhaled. It was over, or so she thought. Nathaniel hadn't sat back down. He was still standing, staring at the empty doorway, something distant in his expression, like a man putting together the final pieces of a puzzle. Then he turned to Charles. You knew. Charles didn't deny it. He set his teacup down, folding his hands neatly over his cane. Nathaniel's voice was low, dangerous. You knew about Langley. Charles nodded. Of course I did. Silence. Thick, unmoving. Riley stiffened. Nathaniel looked like he'd just been blindsided, like his mind was racing through every conversation they'd ever had, every warning his father had ever given him. How long? Nathaniel's voice was tight. Charles sighed. Long enough. Nathaniel's fists clenched at his sides. And you didn't think to tell me? Charles held his gaze, calm, unwavering. No. The answer was so blunt, so absolute, that it stole the air from the room. Nathaniel took a step back, shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Charles exhaled, leaning back slightly. You're angry. Nathaniel let out a hollow laugh. Oh, you think? You had to see it for yourself. Charles's voice was steady but firm. If I told you, you would have dismissed it, rationalized it. That's what you do, son. You trust your systems, your protocols. But business isn't just numbers, it's people, and sometimes people will betray you. Nathaniel didn't respond. Charles nodded toward Riley. And sometimes they will surprise you. Riley's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Nathaniel was still too stunned to speak. Riley could see it, the way his entire worldview had just shifted. He wasn't just questioning his father. He was questioning himself. Finally, Charles pushed himself to his feet. I wanted to see if you were the kind of man who could recognize the difference. He adjusted his coat. Now I know. With that, he walked toward the door, pausing only once. And, for the record, you chose wisely. Then he was gone. The silence stretched long after he left. Nathaniel finally turned to Riley, something raw, unguarded in his expression. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked unsure. Riley let out a slow breath. So, she gave a small smirk. Still think you don't need me? Nathaniel huffed a laugh. Just barely. Then, shaking his head, he said the words neither of them had expected. Welcome to Whitmore Innovations, Ms. Carter. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.